Welcome to the course on Business Visionaries and Innovators, New Perceptions and Lessons, and to this Part 7, Vision Element Number 4, Retrovision. From my earliest thoughts about visions and visionaries, it always had to do with looking forward. One simply didn't have a vision of the past. Of course, we all learn in history classes the value of studying the past to better prepare for the future. But looking back was to study what others did, even the visions of our predecessors, not to have one's own vision of the past. It was during my work with family businesses, first as a lawyer and later as a consultant and professor, that I began appreciating the extent to which successful family businesses were anchored in the values and cultures of their predecessors. Some merely adopted their father's or grandfather's vision for the business. Others modified or adapted the older vision to current and times and needs. And still others boldly rejected older visions that had lost relevance or value, and in some cases had become downright counterproductive. However they used or abandoned the older vision, the act of looking back and considering their business's previous leaders' visions was sufficiently unique and proved so frequent as to compel its study, the study of retrovision. So what are we going to talk about? Well, first we're going to talk about what retrovision really is. We'll explore the definition, the meaning, how it's used, etc. And then we're going to go into case studies. We'll deal with several case studies. Rick Waddell from Northern Trust, George and Jim Stephen from the Weber Grill Company, Keith Williams of Underwriter Laboratories. We'll talk about Howard Schultz. We'll talk about Chuck Schwab, the founders respectively of Starbucks and Charles Schwab and Company. So we'll be dealing with a number of case studies, each of which will talk to you about how they used retrovision. And there's a little difference amongst each of them, but all in all, you'll get the idea of different ways that you can apply retrovision when it's appropriate to improve your chances in your business and if you're becoming a successful business visionary. So part 1, what is retrovision? In my book, Visionaries Are Made, Not Born, I actually define retrovision in the way that I mean it to be used, but we'll come back to the detail of it. Here is the definition. A new vision can call for the rebirth of an old vision for reuse. The visionary recognizes that the values and standards of the past constitute an infrastructure that can be applied in the present to lay new roads for the future. So that's the definition I use, but let's look at what that really means, because it's somewhat counterintuitive. In life, we're often admonished to look forward, not back. How many times have people said that to you? Always look forward, don't look back and have recriminations or things like that. So it's a little counterintuitive to talk about looking back, but after all, different times and different circumstances demand different decisions and actions. So there's always a desire to be with it. Up to date, current in both focus and thinking. But sometimes that means having your feet on the ground, stationary, substantively, based on what has occurred before you. It seems even more so now that electronics make things move faster and farther, that we have to look backward and find the foundations, the infrastructure for what we're going to need to move forward. It reminds me of the quote by the famous Spanish philosopher and poet George Santayana: "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." There's a lot of merit in that. A lot to be said for looking back, if you will. Our society is based on a string of generations, each one learning from the past. This process is what prevents us from having to start over each time. Imagine if we had to recreate the wheel every generation. It is, if you will, what prevents the need to constantly or continually reinvent that wheel. So learning from others' mistakes, we talk about that a lot. Everyone tells us to learn from others' mistakes, not to make them ourselves, because the cost is far less if it's somebody else's mistake. It helps avoiding the pain, the burden, the cost of making those mistakes yourself. And learning what not to do is likely even more important than learning what to do. I always told that to my children and to my grandchildren, that it was most important that they learn what not to do rather than what to do. Learning what to do is something that is human nature. We will learn what to do. learning what not to do is often what we have to be taught. So we humans err many times trying to achieve each success. So we do that to avoid the failures and to be more productive. And we're going to talk more on the changes in this process from the past to the present and into the future later on in this chapter. In the 1990s, the dean of the University of Chicago Law School, my alma mater, invited me to teach a course on entrepreneurship to the University of Chicago's law students. I declined for a number of reasons, distance from my home, my busy schedule, etc. But then I posed a riddle to the dean. I said, what is the essential element that you teach to all law students, which is truly anathema to entrepreneurs? And after several attempts at the answer, I finally told him that the answer I had in mind was precedent. Precedent is what guides all legal decisions. Precedent is what every entrepreneur seems driven to overcome. So how could we teach law students to do precedent, to follow precedent, and not to do precedent, not to follow precedent all at the same time? It is doable. And I was being somewhat facetious with him, especially because I posed it as a binary, one of two alternative answers. All entrepreneurs are either for or against precedent. And as I've said in some of the other chapters in this course, binary is suspect. Whenever your choices are binary, it's yes or no, it's plus or minus. Be careful, there's probably an answer in between or elsewhere that's more important, as it was there. So we said retrovision has a looking back element, and there are pros and cons, we know that. And I said it shouldn't be binary all or nothing, but there are some times where there are differences that seem that way. The easy one would be strategics and tactics. Strategies and tactics are, subject to obsolescence, if you will. Their shelf lives may vary, but they all have shelf lives. And successful business people learn how and when to pivot to different strategies, different tactics. So you might say that that's binary, but that's only binary in category. Business visions consist of at least two elements. The visions about the business's operations. That's element one. This can consist of products, services that are offered, approaches to methods of selling or distributing, of quality, of pricing, and other elements of business plans and models, etc. And they're subject to change periodically, sometimes even frequently, because you have to adapt. This is an area where good business people pivot, change, adapt constantly. And then you have the other element, principles, values, standards, cultures, whatever you want to call them, established to conceive, develop, grow, and prosper with and through the visions. Now, these are the long-lasting things. These values, standards, cultures, they last for years, decades, or even centuries. They serve as the anchor or the ballast through multiple generations of owners and leaders, and also through multiple iterations of the business. My second book, Invent, Reinvent, Thrive, we talk about reinventing the business constantly, and that's the only way to succeed. If you don't reinvent your business, the odds are it will fail at some point. And here we talk about these principles, these cultures that have to be long-lasting. You can reinvent your business without necessarily changing those principles that are the bedrock of that business. So there's a difference, and it's worth understanding. Let's consider some actual business examples to make sure you understand this. And that means we're going to the case studies. And as I mentioned, we're going to be dealing with a number of case studies. Each of them have retrovision demonstrated in the case study. Each of those uses it differently, but it's that full conglomerate of activities, that full conglomerate of different applications of retrovision that you have to have as your menu to select from when it's appropriate in your business or for your vision.